really can work, how much of it, where it should be, and when it should be installed.
Great. So that's kind of the questions I've covered, and I thought maybe we'd go through and have some quick closing comments. I really appreciate everybody coming here tonight. It's a great crowd. This has got 2 entities videotaping this, so it's going to be widely available for viewing for those of us that couldn't be here tonight. I guess what I'll say is just reiterate the whole reason that I wanted to have this, and other people encouraged me to do this, is to start this education process, right? As opposed to just, you know, passively sitting around waiting for another project to come and trying to figure out what to do. I really think since the public has such an active role in what ultimately happens here, the smarter we are going into it, the more likely we're going to get what we want out of it. So that, and just learning about these other areas that are they start off very similarly. I remember when we started figuring out we should get a significant park here, we learned that all these big, beautiful venues, whether it was up in Crissy Field in San Francisco, or Richard talking about Chicago, or Ben's project, they all start with a crazy idea and no money. And through, you know, persistence and leadership and sticking to it, they ultimately end up getting done. If either of those fall apart, then obviously, you know, something else is going to happen. And we've certainly seen that happen. So anyway, we want to get a park there with some development, not a big development plan with some park. And I think we just keep that basic goal in mind, and we should be okay. All right, Richard, you got any closing thoughts? Or?
Well, you know, I certainly don't have an answer. I do have a couple of thoughts. So I think the way that you need, that when every community will start to think about this, is if you have a private buyer that buys 50 acres of land, then they're going to want floor area ratios. That's basically how much building they can have. And if you're going to ask for half of the site or some portion of the site, then typically you would take whatever buildable area you could do on that half, and you would move it over on the other piece. So in other words, you'd kind of stack it up on the edges. And that's a fair thing to do. So I think you're really going to have to search about how much density. So you're pretty, you know, low, you know, 1, 2-story. I was reading the zoning, you know, you get up there about 45 feet is your tallest one. But you have an interesting, you know, site here because you're cascading down a hill. You have some pretty tall building, you know, the power plant structure. You don't really see it as you approach from the east. It's kind of nestled in there. And some of your biggest buildings in the community, like the Ramada, the hotel, Crown Plaza, I think, you know, that's a 5 or 6 story. That's getting up there and all. You have the 1940s, you know, power plant. Those are pretty tall buildings, yet they don't seem overwhelming. So I would look to take clues from kind of the taller buildings that are there, kind of understand how that could nestle into the landscape so it's not this big weird thing that's landed from out of space there, and just trying to get a sense of that. I think from a site design standpoint, again, everyone's going to have interesting ideas, but again, as you approach for the east, you're high. I think I was walking today, you could have spectacular views in a park space or in a row of buildings that front a park with all the restaurants and cool things that Larry was just talking about, so you could have that. Then I can imagine going into a space with the old Salt Lake and the picture I saw and the idea of going down and being very immersive down in there so you're not related to the ocean. It's very, very different. And so I guess the last thing is, how do you move forward? So there's a few ways to do it. I know there's been, you know, I think any design professional would be fascinated to be invited to come have a look at this and would generate ideas and probably participate in a competition. As a design professional, I'll tell you the challenge for that is there might not be anything to win. You know, it may be an ideas generating thing, and it's going to take you, and you're going to have to put the pieces you like together. So that's a little bit of a challenge, but it would generate some really interesting ideas. I guess the other way, you know, I've seen it is you kind of get consultant team and meet with the community, and you start to go through a process to understand these relations I just talked about, density and use, and develop kind of a framework and a vision, and then, you know, work with the property owner or put it out there as your vision would be the other way. So you'll have to figure out what's right for you. It probably could be a mix of both.
Okay, thank you. Ben, do you have any comments?
I would agree with Richard 100%. One thing, it's a little secret, but architects and designers can't help themselves but design. So as soon as you mention competition, there may be money at the end of the day, or there may not, but we'll still pour our blood and guts on the table and show you some ideas. Another kind of just important thing is there's simple things about nature, the laws of gravity that cannot be redefined. Water will not flow uphill. The wind blows in a certain direction, whether we like it or not. It's really important to be sensitive to those environmental components that you've all come to appreciate being here in Redondo Beach. I think also the sense of what's possible. And with a lot of these habitat projects, you say, oh, we're gonna, restore a wetland, but what does that really mean? Which animals are you really designing that for? And when you find that, you really kind of begin to be amazed. The roofs of all these buildings could be all living roofs. That could be part of the requirement, that you could put into policy. How do you really design this with a sense of specificity so that this is not like any other place in the world? Also, just to kind of put in perspective what Richard was mentioning about FAR, which is floor area ratio, is, you might develop or find a certain development sort of capacity the developer might be interested to invest on. That could be many sort of shorter buildings spread throughout the site. So it might leave 30% as park space, which I think is clearly not what Mayor Brand is advocating for. But it could be a couple quite taller buildings. So for those people that fear sort of height or scale, I think it depends where they're located, and also what Richard was mentioning in terms of the topography, those view sheds. Maybe you'll sort of never notice it because you thought it was the old smokestack. So how do we kind of work with that? And also don't forget the history. While most people, there's not a lot of fondness for the old industrial kind of look of it, maybe there's a way to rethink it, retool it, make it your own. Those are really important aspects.
Great. Larry, you getting?
Yeah, just in short summary, after working on public-private transactions for 40 years in many, many communities, I'll say this, that the communities that get what they want do it because they know what they want. And I think the process of discovery that we're talking about, the alternatives, they're key, because out of that discovery process has to come a vision that the community can get behind. It has to become a platform for success that really paves the way to go get the funding, get the level and quality of design, and get the private sector to help us deliver something that we could all be proud of and enjoy. But if you don't know fundamentally where you want to go with this piece of property, then you'll probably go nowhere. And I see that mistake play out from time to time. And that's why I think starting this community dialogue in this way and in other ways as we can move forward is really essential. The more the merrier, the more is better, because the time will come when decisions about the contents, the design, the phasing, the size of the project will come. It'll hit this community, and if it disintegrates into dissension, then probably we'll end up where you can end up. We've seen that in the waterfront. But if there's enough collaboration and transparency about the solutions, and there's a significant effort to stay together and make it work, then we'll find the money. A deal will be cut with the developer because they're born to cut deals, just like land use planners are born to provide design and vision. These guys that develop properties just like to cut deals. And the community, most importantly, knowing that that can happen, needs to manage it so it happens the way it wants it to.
Well, that's a great close, Larry. I want to thank all you guys for coming. Thank you guys for coming. Yeah, if you want to look at it again or share with your friends, you'll see it online soon.